Everybody, happy Wednesday evening live tutorial stream. This is one of only 2 streams that we are doing this week. The next second of the 2 streams, of course, being our 7:30 p.m. sale this evening, because I am being a terrible slacker face and I am going on another vacation. 2 vacations in 3 weeks. Can Heather handle it? It remains to be seen. I think she's having some issues over there on her side of the stream. There may be some murdering in the face that I might have to deal with when I get back. Not of me, because I won't be here, but of people who are here instead of me. So everyone pray for Heather. She will also be running the Zoom on Friday night. I'm going to try and drop in for a couple minutes if I can as well on Friday, but
so Zoom, somebody remind me to remind her.
Right, so the Zoom will be happening, and I will try and remind Heather to send out the email tomorrow. So many things hinge on us remembering stuff. I feel like that's a bad plan. Things should never hinge on Heather and I remembering things, me specifically. I mean, Heather's way better at remembering things than I am. But anyway, sorry, I'm also tracking my dinner. 3 minutes. Okay. But anyway, so
go up there.
Well, in like 3 minutes. So, welcome to the Beading Dreams live tutorial stream. What are we doing tonight? Aside from me just rambling aimlessly, we are doing this. These are our coiled wire earrings. Now, you may notice they, Jen's not wrong. This is what my phone is for, you know, but I even have to keep it in my head long enough to put the reminder in my phone. And then there are so many reminders.
Yeah.
So many reminders. But anyway, so you may notice that this project bears a passing resemblance to our tribal coiled earrings. It is very much a similar type of technique. It's just a coiled wire technique. This time I've just applied it to a hoop style earring instead of the kind of lyre shaped earring that the tribal coiled earrings are. So let's talk tools and supplies for this evening's tutorial. You're going to need 3 different sizes of wire. Okay, so you're going to need a size of wire that's actually going to be the base of the hoop. And since this is an earring that actually goes through your ear, you're going to need 20 gauge wire. Most people's ears, that's the thickest that they can handle. 18 gauge is too thick for most people. It's not comfortable going through their ears. And for something like a hoop like this where you need a somewhat sturdy base, something like 22 gauge wire just isn't strong enough. So 20 gauge is kind of your nice happy medium there. So I'm making my pair tonight in sterling. My sample I made in gold. So I've got 20 gauge sterling silver wire. And then anytime you're doing a coiled wire project, you're going to need a wire upon which to coil and a wire with which to coil. So your wire upon which you're coiling, your core wire, can be 24 or 22. I'm using 22 sterling silver tonight. And then you're going to need something with which to coil, which needs to be thinner. That's going to be 26 sterling silver. As far as lengths go, you're going to need about 6 inches per earring of your 20 gauge. You're going to need about a foot per earring of your 22 or 24 gauge, and you're going to need about 3 feet per earring of your 26 gauge. So anytime you're coiling, because you're making circles, you're going to need approximately 3 times your coiling wire as you're going to need your core wire. So I'm just going to go ahead and start by cutting all those pieces of wire out. Also, you are going to need some beads. I'm using some 5mm, oops, there's no Heather there because she's waiting to open the door for my dinner because she's the bomb. So I'm using some 5mm silver plated beads. The important thing with the beads here is that they have to have a big enough hole to accommodate not only, good night, that's very bright. There, that's better. They need to have a big enough hole to not only accommodate your earring hoop wire, but also your core wire from your coil. So both of those wires pass through each of the beads. So it is important that your beads have a fairly large hole. These have a pretty solid, probably about a 1.25mm hole, so they should work pretty well. And if you're going to follow my pattern exactly, you're going to need 6 of them. 3 per earring, but you don't necessarily need, goodness, mouse, go away. You don't necessarily need to follow that exactly. You could put more beads. You could do 5 per earring instead of 3. You could extend this up further. In that case, of course, you need to use more wires. There are lots of variations. that you can do with this. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut all of my pieces of wire. So I'm going to start with my 20 gauge, and I'm going to cut two 6-inch pieces of wire. And that would be so much easier if I had brought any tools at all of any kind over here. All I have is an extra large ring mandrel. That's not going to help me unless I need to beat somebody. I will be right back. Of the covering room, yes. Egg rolls are all you. Okay, look, tools. It's exciting. So as far as tools go, you're just going to need your basics. You're going to need a chain nose pliers, that's the flat one. You're going to need a round nose pliers, that's the round stabby one. And you're going to need a wire cutter, and you are also going to need a ring mandrel or about a 1 or 1 1/4 inch dowel. So I'm going to take my 20 gauge wire. Once again, now that I have cutters, I'm going to cut two 6-inch pieces of it. And try and make those as straight as possible. Alright, two 6-inch pieces of my 20 gauge wire, two 12-inch pieces of my 22 gauge wire, and then two 36-inch pieces of my 26 gauge wire. Ta-da. 26 gauge wire, two 3-foot pieces. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so once again, I've got two 6-inch pieces of my 20 gauge wire, two 12-inch pieces of 22. You could also use 24 for that, and then two 36-inch or 3-foot pieces of my 26 gauge wire. So I'm going to start with my 20 gauge wire. Wow, that should not have been that difficult. It's been a minute since apparently I streamed, though it's only been since Saturday, which is a normal window of time, but apparently I forgot where everything was on my stream deck. It's true. Alright, so I'm going to take my 20 gauge wire and I'm going to take my 22 gauge wire, and I'm going to go... Alright, I want this to wind up around the middle of my wire, so I want the middle bead to be in the middle of my wire. So I'm going to coil about 1/2 inch back, yeah, plus my initial coil plus my bead. So I want to go about 1 inch off of center, so I am going to actually measure that. So there's my center, there's an, alright, so this is about 1 inch off of center. So by 1 inch off of center, just in case that's not clear, what I mean is it's a 6-inch piece of wire. So what I did is I measured to 3 inches, which was here, and then measured back 1 inch. That's where I'm going to start my coiling. Now, if you don't want to do that, you absolutely could start your coiling in the middle and then go out to either side. That's an easier way of doing it, if that works better for your brain parts. I'm going to take my 22 gauge wire and I'm going to put it crossways, so that it's crossing over my 20 gauge wire, and they're perpendicular to each other. So my skinnier wire, my 22 gauge, is going north-south. My thicker wire, my 20 gauge, is going east-west. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pinch that crossing point with the index finger and thumb of my non-dominant hand. When I'm coiling, I'll coil with my dominant hand, which is my right hand, and I'll hold with my left hand. Obviously, if you're left-handed, most people would flip it, but really do whatever's comfortable for you. I mean, if you like to coil with your non-dominant hand, then good on you. The other thing is, if you're doing this left-handed, instead of starting, you'll notice that I started 1 inch to the left of center. If you're coiling left-handed, you know, I start 1 inch to the right of center so that you're coiling this way. I'm going to be coiling this way. So I'm going to pinch that nice and hard, and I'm going to just hold that with all my might, and I'm going to coil around 4 or 5 times with that 22 gauge wire. Now, you may have a coil or two at the beginning here that's not very pretty. That's totally fine. But what I want is I want to accomplish at least 4 coils that are nice and neat and tight. That's what's going to anchor my core wire of my coil onto my earring wire. Then I'm going to take that core wire and I'm just going to lay it parallel to my earring wire, and I'm going to grab one of my beads. I'm going to take my bead and I'm going to thread it onto my coiling wire, and then when I get down to my earring wire, I'm going to thread that through as well. And again, this is why it's important that your beads have fairly large holes. If I need to, I can hold these with my chain nose and just gently sort of pull that bead down. What I want is I want my wires to stay taut and to stay parallel. During this, what I don't want is I don't want to get like this big bubble of one of my wires, which if that was going to happen, it would absolutely be your skinnier wire, obviously, your 22. Now, I also don't want to do what I just did, and I don't want to do that either. So this stream is starting out really, really well, y'all. So let me pick up the thing I just dropped on the floor, and then we'll back up a bit, talk about what I just did. So, what I did whilst I was trying to snug my bead up against my coil is I actually slid my entire coil right off of that. Thanks, Scott. Like, the stream needed to know that. They already know I'm a klutz. Everybody knows I'm a klutz. Raise your hand if you don't know I'm a klutz. Yeah, I didn't think there was anybody out there. Well, tell Scott. He just called me a klutz on the internet.
What?
He did. It's right there in white and blue.
Scott.
Scott, now you're in trouble with Heather. Okay, so what I did is I slid it right off the end of my earring wire, which is, again, not what I was trying to do. So now we're going to try my darndest to just fish my earring wire through my coils. And this may or may not work. See, I'm kind of mangling my wire here, so I think we're going to just start again. Well, that's fair. We can both smack you tomorrow, but we can also reprimand you on the internet now. Okay, take 2. I'm going to coil this on. This time, we're going to try not to, you know, screw up on the internet. That doesn't always work well for me, so we're going to see how it goes. So once again, 4 decent coils, and thread on your bead. Now I'm going to make sure I hang on to these wires as I am pulling this down, and that is what I was trying to do earlier. Alright, so I've got my bead resting flush against my coil, and then I've got the rest of my earring wire. At this point, I can take this coiling wire and I can unwind this part that looks ugly, and I can probably trim that off and tuck it in. So trim, and just tuck in your pokey stabby end, because nobody likes pokey stabby ends. Okay, so that's the beginning of our earring. Now we're going to create this coiled section right here. So I'm going to take my wire and I'm just going to bend it out at 90 degrees from that bead. Now here is a secret for when you're making coils of coils like this. When you are, oh, hey Megan, I like to trim straight and then just press it down. It's all about the angle you press it down. in my opinion, rather than necessarily being about the angle at which you trim. So when you're coiling a wire, it's always easier if you coil down at the end, because it gives your hand much more freedom of movement, and you're not kind of, you know, as my father would say, folding, spindling and mutilating this wire whilst you're coiling. As long as, oh, hi Fee. Hi Fiona. Yes, Fiona is Scott's daughter. She's watching the stream in Chicago. Learning how to make earrings with the rest of us. So, when you're making a coil, as long as the wire around which you're coiling is decently straight, you can coil at the end and then slide it down. And this is, from someone who's done a lot of wire coiling, this is so very much easier than trying to coil right down here where your coil is going to end up. So I'm going to go to the end of my wire. And so now what I've got is, this is my 22 gauge wire. Okay, so just to check back in, because this is, I know, can get a little confusing. Okay, so here's my 20 gauge wire. That's going to become my actual earring. This is my 22 gauge wire, which is going to be the core of my coil, and then in my right hand here is my 26 gauge wire, which is going to be my coiling wire. So I'm going to the end of my 22 gauge wire, and I'm going to hold my 26 gauge wire crossways to my 22 gauge wire. So now my 26 gauge is going north-south, my 22 is going east-west. So you may have noticed a theme here is your thinner wire is always going to be the vertical component, and your thicker wire, whatever that is going to be the horizontal component. Now again, I'm going to hold that as hard as I can, and I'm going to start coiling. And now when I'm coiling, I want to wrap this wire tightly around my core that I'm coiling, and I also ideally want my coils to be very close together, okay? And if they're not close together, you can totally cheat and do that. So you want them to look like a slinky that is closed, and we're going to continue to do that until we have about, and this is kind of up to you, but I'm going to go with until we have about 1.25 inches of coiling. So I'm just going to keep going, just keep on wrapping, and I'm not going to keep squishing it together, because the thing of this, wow, that's very bright. The thing of this is that when you coil around your earring, your coils are going to separate. So if they're, even if they're not perfect, they're going to normalize. It's one of the cool things about this. And yes, Megan, Heather's coughing, but she promises everyone she's not dying. It's possible she tried to inhale a crab puff in the literal sense. So 1.25 inches of coiling, and once you get going, it goes pretty quickly. Now you don't want to coil all the way off the end, because you do need to slide this down. I need just a little bit more, so what I'm going to do is just grab the end and just wiggle this down just a tear, and see how easy it slides. So again, as long as your core wire is decently flat, this should be no problem at all. Oh, it's always fun, you know, when you inhale the stuff with the spicy stuff on it. That's even better than just inhaling the food down the wrong pipe. Okay, so that is 1.25 inches of coiling. I'm not going to trim this off just in case this doesn't give me the amount of coiling that I'm dreaming of right now, but I am going to trim off this initial, sorry, I don't know why the white balance is just so incredibly excited, but it really is. I'm going to trim off this initial piece. And then once again, that gives me a pokey stabby. We don't want pokey stabbies, so we're going to just press that down. Especially when you're tucking in this little end here, just make sure you're literally just curving it down with the rest of your coils. You don't want to crimp it too hard, because then you are going to impede the sliding of this. Then I'm just going to take this whole coil. I'm going to grab my 22 gauge wire with my chain nose, and I'm just going to slide this all the way down until it's flush with my bead. And once again, you notice that was really easy. That took practically no effort at all. Now I'm going to take this coil that I just made and I'm going to coil it around my 20 gauge wire. So what that's going to make is this double coiled effect. Now you need to make sure that this wire is not just spinning around. So I'm going to take my chain nose and I'm going to just hold that just to give myself a good start. There we go. So now I'm just coiling my coiled wire around my 20 gauge wire. Like so. Alright, and oh, Fee's concerned about my owie on my finger. I think it's okay. I just nicked myself a little bit when I was making something earlier. But I promise it's okay. See, no blood or anything even seeping through the band-aid. So it's a very minor owie. I just put a band-aid on it because it's sometimes dirty at work. And I like to keep it clean because nobody needs, you know, blood poisoning from a 1/4 inch cut. Okay, so now that I've coiled and I'm happy with the amount of coiling that I have, I'm going to take my 26 gauge wire and I can cut that off. Alright, so I'm going to take that, I'm just going to nip that off. I'm going to try not to drop it on the floor when I do so, and then tuck in my pokey stabby, and now I'm going to take one more coil that's just plain wire, like so, just to kind of anchor that down, and then once again I'm going to put these two wires parallel. I'm going to grab another bead and thread that onto my 22 gauge wire and then also onto my 20 gauge wire. So again, both of those wires are going through that bead. Hold. Make sure when you're pulling it down that you're not getting this. See how that's kind of tensioning that thinner wire? That is not what we want. We want to keep those even. So try not to curse when your best friend's child is watching the stream, and also it's before 9. There we go. Alright, so what I want is I want that right down next to that coil that I just made. Now we repeat. So I'm going to take that 22 gauge wire, I'm going to again bend it out at 90 degrees from my bead, and I'm once again going to take my 26 gauge wire, of which I have a substantial amount left. I probably cut too much. 3 feet was probably a little more than I needed. But I'm going to go ahead and once again coil about 1 1/4 inch worth of coiling at the end of my wire. Now let's talk for a minute about coiling. So I do all my coiling by hand. I am not a fan of coiling gizmos or gadgets. Can you put your wires in a drill and hold one and run the drill and coil? Yes, of course you can. Can you use, you know, gadgets and gizmos and widgets that that people have created just to sell to beaders to make money off of us to coil wire? Of course you can, absolutely. And you know what? If you've got legitimate issues like arthritis, hand pain, you know, problems with your skin where you literally cannot do this, then absolutely use every tool that's at your disposal, you know, to make coils in your wire. But I personally don't have any of those problems, knock on wood, and so I find it's so much easier and more versatile to just actually coil the wire by hand, because you don't have to worry about getting a gizmo or a drill or anything into the right place. You know, you just get your fingers in there and you do it. But no judgment for anybody who does it the other way. Alright, so I've got 1/4 inch more to go. Bam, bam, there we go. Alright, so once again, I can go back to my beginning, and I can get rid of this beginning part that's kind of gross looking. Undo that. Trim. And then press down the pokey stabby bit. And then we're going to slide that down, which means you're going to grab your 22 gauge with your chain nose. Again, just slide it all the way down. At this point, it should hold itself pretty easily, so you shouldn't have to engage your pliers. You're just going to once again coil that coiled bit around your 20 gauge wire. So notice what I said, your coils are going to spread out when you, wow, that was terrible. Don't put your finger in front of the camera lens so no one can see anything. The coils are going to spread out, so that's once again, that's going to kind of normalize your coils. So if they're not perfect, by the time you've wrapped it around your earring, no one's ever going to know. Now I can take, once again, my 26 gauge wire, and I can trim that wire off right there. So yeah, 3 feet is definitely going to be enough to do both of these earrings. So Laura, you can change that in your notes, that you do not need 3 feet per earring. Alright, then you're going to go ahead and do one wrap just to kind of lock it off, and then once again we're going to put these parallel and we're going to string on our final bead. You know, the problem is when I'm making my samples, I don't, oops, to do that. So Megan, it was each of the coils was 1.25 inches, and then the finished coiled length on the actual earring is about half an inch or just a little bit more. Would you mind turning on the tumbler? Thanks. Check that the lid is closed first. Oh yay. So I did everything except turn the machine on. It's interesting how the machine works better when you actually push the on button. Shockingly, if you don't push the on button, it doesn't turn on. It's crazy like that. Just crazy. Okay, so now I'm going to anchor my 22 gauge on the other side of my bead. What I'm doing is I'm mirroring this here. So that means about 4 or 5. I think I wound up with 5 just looking at it. 3, 4, 5 coils. Trim your end off and press down your pokey stabby. So now what you should have is you should have this construction where you've got bead, coil, bead, coil, bead, and that should be about in the center of your 6-inch piece of wire. If it's not, this whole thing should slide. It's not going to slide as easily as your single coils did, just because you got a lot more kind of making tension on your wire. But if you did need to slide this, you absolutely could. Now I'm going to repeat this at full speed on my second earring. Heather has an interesting question for the stream. Do you think, stream, if we attached a clapper to our tumbler, which is, for anybody who's not familiar, a large vibrating tub of basically stainless steel BBs, do we think it would constantly be turning itself on and off? Inquiring minds, not mine, but Heather's, want to know. Alright, so I've got my 22 gauge, or my 20 gauge piece of wire. I'm going to find the center. I'm going to go about 1 inch off center. I'm going to grab my other 22 gauge piece of wire. I'm going to take that and I'm going to anchor it onto my wire with about 4 or 5 wraps. Since I did 5 wraps on the other one, I'm going to try and do 5 wraps on this one, because usually when you're making earrings, you want them to be at least mostly symmetrical. Now, that is a trap that a lot of people can get kind of sucked into, of when you're making earrings, you know, just getting so focused on them being symmetrical and identical, and just please don't forget there's a head in between. So as long as you don't, you know, point people to the flaws in the program, it's going to be okay, I promise. Then I'm going to take my bead, thread that onto my 22 gauge wire, and then down onto my 20 gauge wire as well, and then I'm going to pull that down flush so that it sits right up against this coil, and I'm going to try my level best not to yank this off the end of the wire like I did before, she says, whilst making faces at the internet. No, no, I said no. I said is what I said. So once I'm done fighting with these earrings, which is probably going to be in about 20 minutes or so is when we'll be concluding this tutorial. About 30 minutes after that, we will be doing a live merchandise sale on the Beading Dream stream. We are going to do a little bit more, I think, of 50% off in bargain strands, and then I am going to continue on with that 8-inch strand trunk show as well that I got a little bit of done on previous sale streams. So it's going to be a fun sale tonight, and then we are going to be dark for the rest of the week because, as previously stated, my slacker self is going on yet another vacay. Yes, I am. Again, the last vacay was kind of spur of the moment. This one actually has been planned for quite a long time. So I will be gone for a long weekend. I will be back to my regular streaming schedule a week from today on Wednesday the 8th, and we will be continuing our regular streaming schedule all the way through Christmas. Now I'm going to take, now that I've actually finally gotten, dang it was just there. There we go. Now that I've gotten my bead flush with my anchoring wraps, I'm going to I'm going to bend that wire at 90 degrees to the bead. I'm going to go to the end of the wire and I'm going to make that 1.25 inches of coiling. Megan asked a question, will large hole beads also work with this design? And the answer is yes, they absolutely will. You just need to make sure that they're not so large hole that they're going to slide over your coils. I mean, once you got the coil, it's pretty fat, so the chances of you losing it inside your bead are pretty slim. But that is, that is the caveat, is, the beads can have as large a hole as you want them to have, but they can't slide over that coil. Alright, so now I'm coiling 1.25 inches of coil on the end of this wire that I'm then going to slide down to be next to my bead. See, so I'm working on classes for next week, which were supposed to all be done by now, but of course today didn't go as planned because days never go as planned when you're going to be leaving town the next day. And but I've got at least 2 classes done. There's another 2-parter next week where we're going to be doing a sawn, stamped, soldered, and set pendant. So basically part 1 of that class is I'm going to show you how to saw shapes out of metal using a jeweler's saw. It's something I haven't done in a while because it's kind of hard for me to do on stream, so we're going to try and jump that hurdle and get myself a good sawing setup so I can show you guys how to saw. So we're going to do some sawing and some texturing and some wire working to make pieces that we're then going to solder onto a sawn out base to make a cool figural pendant. So I'm pretty excited about that one. And that's what's actually in the tumbler right now that I just asked Heather to turn on. So, and that's all I got. So I still got to come up with 2 more classes for next week. Hey, Cindy. And I know we've had requests from the stream, and I know that they're written somewhere in my messy work area, but I have no idea where. Does anybody have any requests for next week classes? I've got 2 open slots. I've got Thursday lunch, which should be something fairly simple, and then I've got Saturday. So if anybody has any suggestions, throw them out there. Alright, now I'm going to take my coil that I made, I'm just going to slide it down so that it's sitting flush with my bead, like that, and then I'm going to wrap. And this is where I'm going to have to probably take my pliers and I'm going to have to hold that wrap, because otherwise what happens is it just spins around your 20 gauge wire, and you don't get any actual coiling done. You just, go around and around, but you don't make any headway. I know this sounds kind of like some of our lives these days. It's been a while since I did a basic wire ring class, so I was thinking that might be a good one for Thursday noon, which then just leaves me with Saturday. We also need to go, I need to do a back to basics week, because it's been a while since I did all of those. Okay, so now I'm going to cut off my 26 gauge wire. Make sure you cut off the thin long wire, not the less thin and less long wire, okay? The 22 gauge wire you need, the 26 gauge wire you still need, but you don't need it to be attached to anything at this point. Again, tuck in your pokey stabbies. And there we go. Now I'm going to take my, woohoo, go Heather. Alright, now I'm going to take my 2 wires, I'm going to put them parallel, and I'm going to take my bead and I'm going to thread that onto my 22 gauge wire, and then when I get down to it, I'm also going to thread it onto my 20 gauge wire, like so. And I'm just going to pull that all the way down, make sure I get it flush with that coil. I forgot something, not the end of the world, but I forgot to do a single wrap at the end of that coil, and you'll just see it doesn't finish quite as neatly if you don't do that. So I don't care about that enough that I'm gonna undo it and redo it, but that is the difference. So making that one wrap with your bare wire and then going through the beads really does give you a neater and cleaner look to the finish of your coil. So now I'm going to take my 22 gauge wire, I'm going to bend that out again at 90 degrees, and one more time, 1.5 inches of coiling at the end of my wire. I know this is riveting stuff, right? Watching me wrap wire around wire, it's just crazy. Just gonna scooch that down the wire just a little bit because I want more room. Alright, so that's about 1.25 inches of coiling. Now I can cut off this end of my 26 gauge wire. And again, tuck in my pokey stabby. And then slide that down. And then hold it, and once again coil around your 20 gauge. Alright, at this point you're done with your 22 gauge, not your 22 gauge, stop, Allison, I did not just say that. Your 26 gauge, cut it off. 22 gauge, leave it. No cutty of the 22 gauge. So I am going to do what I forgot to do here, and I'm going to make a loop of just my plain 22 gauge around there, and then place your wires parallel and take your final bead, drop that onto your 22 gauge, and then down onto your 20 gauge. And then go ahead and pull that all the way down. Notice that it comes down much nicer and snugger when you remember to do that thing that I forgot. And then I'm going to take that 22 gauge and I'm going to wrap 4 or 5 times. Again, I want to try and match this end and also my other earring. That's 3, 4, 5. Trim. Press. And I did a terrible thing. I did a really bad job of this. This is nowhere near the middle of this wire, okay? That is not how the middle works, y'all. So this is where we're gonna trust in the fact that it'll slide, we hope, down the wire. Takes a little bit of finagling. Like I said, there's more tension on your wire in this instance because you've got more wires and just generally more things and stuff. But damn it, it's going to work. I'm assuming Fiona is no longer watching because my viewer count went down. Otherwise I might have just taught her a new word. Sorry, Scott. There we go. Alright, so there we go. Now we are in the middle of the wire. Make sure that everything is lined up. I think I cut that wire too long a little bit, so we're going to even this up. Alright, so here we go. Got two now coiled wire pieces that are centered up on my 20 gauge wires. Now all I need to do is make these into earrings. That's going to be accomplished with my, this is actually a large size ring mandrel. Believe it or not, this is a ring mandrel that goes up to size 24. It is a very useful device if you're doing things that need hammering. If you never do anything that needs a steel mandrel as far as like smaller circles go, you can absolutely get a 1 1/4 inch dowel from the hardware store and it's way cheaper. But obviously you can't hammer on a wooden dowel and you can't hammer on this. So if you do a lot of circles and kind of intermediary sizes, this is actually a really good tool to have. Also, if you know any people with really large fingers, here's also that. Makes me wonder what ring size Andre the Giant wore.
35.
Okay, so now I'm going to take my wire and I'm just going to put it on my ring mandrel and bring it all the way around so that I have my hoop. Well, I mean, have you ever looked at this ring mandrel?
24. You wore it 24.
Okay, so that is the biggest size on this mandrel. Thank you, Heather, for wielding the Google Foo. So for anybody who was wondering, all my nerds out there, Andre the Giant wore a size 24 ring. That is that size right there, okay?
And also 22 shoes.
This is my pointer finger compared to a size 24 ring. That is your random trivia for tonight. Alright, so now I've got two hoops with my coiling on them. I'm going to use my round nose pliers and make a loop on each of these. I want to make that loop perpendicular to the plane of my hoop. So my hoop's kind of curving like this. My loop, my circle, is going to go this way. Bye, Cindy. Thank you. Thanks for dropping in. We miss you. Roll that around. Sorry, and then you want to center it. So after you've rolled it around, you're just going to bring it back so that you've got that loop that's centered over, like if you were holding your wire vertical, it would be centered over the central axis of your wire. Repeat on your other earring. So again, just roll it around and then bring it back. And then I have this tendency when I'm doing things like that, my wrist tends to twist, and so I'll get things that are in really weird angles. Super easy to fix. Just take your chain nose pliers, bend it back in place, and then take those same chain nose pliers, go about a 1/16 of an inch from the end, flip that up. That's going to be the catch. You don't want this to be too long, this part that you're making right now, because this whole thing literally goes through your ear hole. Like, you're going to thread that whole thing through your ear hole in order to put this earring on. So you don't want it to be too big because it's not going to be very comfortable to put on. And then you're going to grab an emery board or a file, whatever you happen to grab first out of your drawer. In my case, it's an emery board. And what I want to do is I just want to emery down the ends of these earring hoops so that they don't hurt when you put them through your ear. So you're just trying to blunt that down, blunt and round the edge of that wire as much as possible. What? Or the nutmeg file. Yes, the nutmeg file definitely needs to be cleaned. Though they would be very good smelling earrings.
Yes.
Alright, and then an earring like this works off of tension, so I don't want this that I have here, because if I put that in there, it's going to be very prone to kind of bouncing out. So what I want to do is I want to actually stretch this a bit, and then when I put that in, I've got tension that's holding that together, and that is my earring hoop. At that point, if I need to do any adjusting of the shape, I can. Like, I just took this down a little bit, so now see it's sitting right at the crook of my bend instead of it was sitting up a little bit before. So once again, we're going to bend that out a bit and then hook it closed and then adjust if need be. And there we go. Ta-da! Coiled wire earring hoops. So thank y'all so much for hanging out with us on our tutorial stream this Wednesday evening for our coiled wire earring hoops project. That was loads of fun and didn't even end too late, so that's very exciting. So for anybody out there who doesn't know who the heck I am, well, good for you. But I'm Allison from Beading Dreams in Dallas, Texas. We are an actual brick and mortar retail bead store. We're here on Lovers Lane in Dallas, Monday through Saturday, 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. If you're not local in Dallas, of course, typically you can find us on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream. Thanks, everybody. 5 times a week with complimentary tutorials. That's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at 6 p.m. plus Thursdays at noon, and live merchandise sales every Wednesday and every Saturday at 7:30-ish p.m. We are, of course, going to be having our 7:30 sale in about 30 minutes, which means it's going to be about 7:45 tonight, and then we are going to be dark for the rest of the week because I am going on vacation. So it's not a typical week here on the Beading Dreams stream, but we will still be having our Zoom Crafty Cocktail time on Friday night. I'll reiterate that during the sale stream because I know there'll be more people watching then. And then we'll be back to our normal streaming schedule on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream, a week from today, Wednesday, December 8th, and we will be continuing that same streaming schedule all the way at least through Christmas. So I'm going to go pull stuff for the sale, figure out what we're doing for y'all tonight. Also wash my hands because wire wrapping makes hands dirty, and eat some of that food that showed up. So see y'all back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream in half an hour.